or something like that. Way of writing things. So yeah, lots of changes, lots of breaking changes. It's been maturing slowly, but there might be some really, really good ideas. So many parts, so many components that need to be implemented with this. This is very much, I would say, a characteristic of our application, because our application has so many tiny little components that interact with each other. The current state of those things is frequently a little jQuery call from some, like I said, some file someplace that comes flying in and changes another piece of information on the same page. Sometimes these conflict with the React stuff, which is pretty cool. Everything needs constant upgrade. There's also, sort of like the new cool thing. We had classes and now context and hooks and what's next, suspense, all those kind of things. Rails API and Webpacker are pretty useful, actually. I was going to say, this is referring to the GraphQL API. Sorry, I didn't add that to this. The class-based API is really easy to implement. I shouldn't say hooks. Anyway, learning to share info between the front end and the back end. Okay? So things like you've got a particular graph, right? And it has data fields and things like that. Okay, now we can actually share fragments between the front end and the back end. So we're actually sharing code, building code, and things like that. And Rails React components are a very useful way to improve an existing app. Still struggling to make sense of it all. It's just one of these late night angsty things. It's like, oh my God, are we doing the right thing? Sometimes it's just wait. But I carry on. Carry the flag, keep going. So currently what we're working on, we're doing a pretty fundamental refactoring and restructuring of the JavaScript code. Okay? And we're updating the GraphQL server, queries and mutations, creating fragments for queries, adding more models to the graph, and using the class-based definition. Breaking down the front-end features into much smaller units and planning them out and developing them better, things like that. It's spreading work from just me to now there's 3 of us, so which is really cool. We have one person who came over from another project, and they're still in the throes of learning this whole sort of thing. They did not have any Ruby or JavaScript to start with, so they're definitely on a very steep learning curve and doing really, really well. And another contractor we brought in, actually not brought in, he's in Ecuador, so he's nicely remote. But he's really good. He's taught me so much. We're adding a Apollo client to smaller component units. Instead of having one Apollo client on the page, there may be several. We're using the query and mutation component so far. And I've really jumped into using hooks and context and things like that. And I'm finding it so much more, so much easier to develop React. Negatives, okay? Like I said, React is old, but still old. Okay? We had several libraries that we tried to pull in that were not maintained consistently and sometimes went in different directions from what we needed. Code base is still a mess. There's new features that are being added to the old code, the legacy JavaScript and things like that. And also we need to implement them again in the React world. So it's, can't quite maintain single direction. Positives, GraphQL is still favorite technology. The Apollo client is working really well. And I would still say that React is a viable technology for development. We went through a rough patch React. It's kind of like, do I really want to do this? Should we go with something else? think with this new year and getting some extra help and things like that, it's really been very beneficial for me, and I feel much more confident in my own development. So this is me. That's basically the talk, and I would love to entertain questions.
You mentioned the Rails engine for the server being negative or problematic. Was that more the way the code was organized and things that kept popping up, or was the actual Rails engine?
It was the way that we had to implement graphs and things like that. One of the, let me just expand on this. Okay, the question just for everyone: why was the Rails engine so problematic? Okay, so if you implement a plugin, you don't want your plugin to depend on the thing that you're plugging it into. Okay? So it could be implemented, a Rails server could be implemented in an engine. And the GraphQL API could be implemented in an engine. Okay? The only thing that would be viable in that engine in this particular environment for the GraphQL engine would be the controller itself, okay? That's responding and sending things out, and possibly the topical query, which is essentially the schema. Okay. Everything else that you implement is tied to your models or to your development or to your environment or some way. Because basically you need to grab data and pull it in and respond to it, things like that. It doesn't serve any purpose to have it be a plugin because it's tied so tightly to the rest of the app. Okay? So, to answer the question, was it a problem of being an engine or a problem of particular implementation? The latter. Okay. Engines themselves are useful. Okay. Some of the really very popular additions to Rails are engines. And they work really, really well. This implementation was not appropriate to use an engine. That addressed the question.
I think so. I'm coming into it a little dark from the Rails and React side, so I'm looking for
fair enough. Fair enough. We can talk about that. Other questions? Yeah.
So your developers, are they fronting REST API calls, or are you actually interacting somehow with like this Rails engine API environment, or can you talk more about how that works?
Sure, yeah. So the question is, how are the resolvers for the GraphQL API server implemented? For ours, we implement them basically as model calls. So they're directly tied to active record. They're not going to another, they're not calling further API call or anything like that. That is a viable direction to go, though. If you wanted to have, wanted to basically front your REST application with a GraphQL server, Apollo server makes a wonderful way to do that. And the Apollo company's been doing a lot of stuff on top of that. So that is viable. In the Ruby on Rails implementation, the GraphQL Ruby, it dives straight into the midst of active record. Which is probably another reason not to go with the separate pluggable engine.
So another question, you talked about the API, the class-based API for implementing the schema. Is that you're transitioning away from using the schema definition language where the entire schema itself is defined as a giant string, essentially?
That was never the way it was done with GraphQL Ruby, Jen. Initially, it was, how to describe this exactly? was an object method that you then passed, basically a Ruby-based DSL, domain-specific language, to a defined field type, blah, blah, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
The new implementation takes advantage of Ruby classes and inheritance. Okay. So there's still a DSL where you say field, name, type, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. Right? The actual individual resolvers are now defined methods on a class, as opposed to doing like defining prod. So I'm trying not to like stretch too far away from JavaScript because I know you'll jump chase afterwards. Stop talking about it. Be advanced. It was the old way was much more cumbersome in terms of pulling everything together. The new class-based, which is Ruby class-based GraphQL library, makes a much cleaner implementation, and things also they're faster. I would say that if you're jumping in on Rails into GraphQL, the documentation for GraphQL Ruby is only fair. It's not great. So if you do that, make a toy app first and play with it and break it and learn all that kind of stuff before you put it into your actual production application and expect it all to work. Yes?
It's pretty common with REST APIs to go down a direction with implementing something and then run into performance concerns and have to re-architect it. Did you have that situation with GraphQL?
Yes. Okay. Luckily, I have no experience with, resource-based Rails applications and REST and things like that. Understand things like N+1 queries and chains and all those kinds of things. There's two saving graces in the GraphQL world, in that if you are not paying attention, you could have a query from a client that could bring your server to your knees by just continually looping and going cycles through the graph, right? Okay, I want the account of the job, of the customer, of the account, of the note, of the job. It's kind of like, and you can just like really beef it all with it. Okay, so there are things on the server side that you implement that are like batch loaders and data loaders and things like that, which basically take care of those sorts of things, plus the usual N+1 queries and include chains and those kinds of things. There's also a really strong, how do I want to put this, admonition, shall we say, to limit the size of your queries. Okay, so you don't return, a 10,000 record query, basically. But yes, you can walk straight on the same pier that REST development does into, performance hell. Nothing's going to save you from that in this, except doing it twice and then figuring out that, maybe we should do something else. Yeah. So if you are, working on the back end and you understand how all those queries and performance issues and things like that work, you are definitely have a leg up. You do have to apply them the same. No, it's not exactly the same way, but you do have to apply them to the GraphQL side as well.
We're using Redux on the front end, and as you've kind of gone through this evolution, did it change your approach to state management?
Okay, so the question is about Redux on the front end. So the legacy code used a lot of Redux, like way too much Redux. Okay. With the newer development using Apollo, we have not used any Redux at all. And we're taking Redux out of the app as much as we can. Okay. For managing state, we're trying to keep state kind kind of localized for the most part, but we're also using context and hooks for things that need it for, like say you get a little bit bigger feature or something like that does need some state management. We have yet to encounter a situation where we need state managed across broad components. And when we get there, I hope to implement the local state stuff using Apollo.
What do you think with front-end or browser-side caching? I know Apollo Client has some mechanisms built in, but are there any like custom behavioral?
We have not done any custom stuff for caching. We're using Apollo caching, and it does a really good job. There are issues that we haven't addressed, like for example, subscriptions. If something happens, you know, another client or another user updates something, we would want it to show up. This is something we have, like our checks are out in the field, right? Okay. And we have, you know, where's the check currently located at this job? The back office may want to know where that is. And there's a map view of the application. There's the, you know, those kind of things. We want to be able to update those, not in real time, but in near real time, you know? So with Apollo, they have a concept of security. So if something happens over there, it can get notified down here. A repoll or a long poll or something like that. We haven't. The Apollo client does have both long pollings and near pollings. So, you know, we tell us just refresh all the words every 10 seconds or so. Our current implementation actually uses a long poll. I say nested bus. My time.
Probably one more question.
Oh, sorry.
My particular apologies, we just had an HVAC system activate here, which is cool because HVAC use is nice and comfortable. But less cool because it's loud, so we're going to bump the mic. And one last question.
Sorry. Any other questions? Last chance. And I'll be available, you know, after if you want to come chat.
Can you hear us in the back at this point? Yes, okay.
Yeah, there's a thumbs up way in the back. Is that it? Cool, thank you so much.
Okay, it is 7:25. I'm sorry.
Let me just add, you guys, I mean, I'm able to talk about pretty much anything, so, you know, hit me up. If you are interested in talking here, definitely.
She's a great resource. But she really was. Okay, one more round of applause.
Yeah.
We are going to take a quick 10-minute break. It's 7:25. Come back at 7:35 for our other speaker. If there's pizza, there is still pizza in the back, so you guys haven't been slacking. Please go eat that. And converse amongst yourselves. We'll be back with you shortly.
Audio, right? We're good? You can hear me? Okay, so don't say anything inappropriate. Too late. Yeah.
Okay, welcome back. I have a quick plug for one of our sponsors. And the sponsor is Front End Masters. And for those of you that don't know Front End Masters, or Mark, who runs Front End Masters, he posted in our general Slack that they have a free 2-day workshop on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. Next week. For React, Redux, and MobX, 9:30 to 4:30 downtown. They do free donuts, coffee, lunch for intermediate React developers. So if you're hanging around and don't have anything to do for those 2 days, you should definitely go check that out because they are awesome. A wonderful free resource.
Steve Kinney is also a great instructor. If someone is doing that workshop, so just go get on Steve Kinney. Figure out what's under his hat.
All right, and so we have our second talk today. It's Mac Decuir.
Decuir?
Decuir.
Yep.
The technical journey of building the invisible network. Let's give him a hand.
Whew. Hi, friends. Can you hear me okay? Is my mic on? Nobody? You can't hear anything? Okay, great. Did I what?
I think we...
Oh, hit the button. Whoops. Power.
Go ahead.
Is that better? Whoa, yeah, okay. I can hear myself, so that's good enough for me, right? Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Decuir, and today we're going to be talking about the technical journey of building the invisible network. The alternative title for this was Frustrating Technical Problems I've Recently Solved and I Wanted to Share while they refresh my mind, which hopefully all of you can appreciate. So who am I? I'm a self-taught software engineer. Like Tamara, my background was Rails until I learned stuff that wasn't Rails. Mostly React has been, React and Rails are the two things that I've spent the most time in. And I've been doing it for the last 3.5 years. Prior to getting into programming, I was a data analyst and also have a background in product too. I'm the founder of the Invisible Network and also Minneapolis Junior Devs. So thanks for the shout out for our upcoming event, which is on June 11th. You might know me from past projects I've worked on like OMG Transit or Break the Bubble. I'm a pizza enthusiast. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am Experiment on Twitter. So what we're going to talk about tonight, two sort of big picture things. The first is sort of the story of the invisible network and how it ended up getting built, what it is, how it got started, and we'll talk a little bit about the initial MVP and validation, and then sort of design decisions that went into building out the actual, like the version 1 platform. And then after that, we'll talk about some of the technical challenges that I've come across and things that I've learned along the way, and hopefully I can share some of my knowledge and things that I've learned through making mistakes. Okay, so at a high level, the invisible network, what is it? It's an anonymous job search platform where it connects people who are looking for work with companies that are hiring through double opt-in introductions. So if you're somebody who's currently working full-time and you're looking for a new job, it's really hard to do that without alerting your boss or without getting spammed by recruiters on LinkedIn. No offense, Paul. So let's just do a quick live demo. And I'll note the URL is invisiblenetwork.io. It's not .com because of domain squatters. All right, so again, kind of what you just saw in a screenshot. I've heard it explained as like Bumble for jobs, where you're taking sort of a model and you're flipping on its head. And so instead of like a job board, this is a list of people who are looking for work. So it's like sort of inverted. So this is all real live data, and these are all real people. So for example, here at the very top of the list is a product manager. And there's like a quick summary. My wife is texting me. So there's a summary of who this person is and sort of things like how much experience they have, what sort of employment they're looking for, what sort of role their ideal next gig would be, that sort of thing. So what that looks like from the experience of somebody who's looking for work or somebody who's hiring is you might come in and you say, I'm looking for work, and then I'll have you fill out a form where you'll share a bit about who you are and what your background is and what you're looking for. And then from there, what I'll do is I'll take your answers, I'll summarize you, I'll take a bit of creative license in how I summarize you, and then you're live on the site. And then for employers, this is a place where you can reduce bias in your hiring process because no names or photos are shown until there's mutual interest that's been established. And so again, no names, no photos. So for example, if an employer wanted to come in and hire this full stack engineer, they can click the request an introduction button, they'll fill out the form, answer a couple questions, then I'll run their answers by this full stack engineer and go from there. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I should say I am not a recruiter, I'm a software engineer. And it's been kind of crazy to me how much I've learned about the world of recruiting as I've been working on this, and like in particular how much recruiters can charge. And so I'm focused first and foremost on helping people find jobs, but I'm also trying to turn this into a sustainable business. So that's the very quick demo. Again, the URL is invisiblenetwork.io. Okay, back to my sweet slides. So the background and the story here. So I recently went through a job search myself in the fall, and as I was going through my job search, one of the people I had lunch with was Thompson Aderin-Comey, who I don't know if folks here know him, but he's one of the most inspiring people I've ever met, and like he's probably the person who I admire and respect the most in all of the Twin Cities. And in talking with him, I like casually mentioned that I wanted to start my own business someday, and he kind of latched onto that, and he was like, no pets, no house, no kids, like now is the time. And so he was saying you should probably you can probably validate like one idea a day. And so I started validating ideas, and I tweeted out the idea of a people/company job matching experiment. And the response was so overwhelming that I had to sort of figure out how to manage and keep track of all of these people. And so with that, I started using Google Forms and Google Sheets. And I found that the combination of using Google Forms and also DMing people on Twitter and trying to have conversations on Twitter DMs was terrible. And conveniently, my pal Brandon over there said, hey, there's this thing called Airtable you should check out. And I got to say, Airtable is pretty amazing, and I'll show you more about why I think Airtable is amazing in a little bit. But I switched to using Airtable for sort of a spreadsheet-like interface to keep track of all of these people. And then I bootstrapped the front end using Create React App. And so the timeline, just for perspective on this, was I started building it in November. I launched it in December. I made my first $100 on the third day, which I feel like as far as validation goes, that's like the dream. Right? Thank you. And then I mentioned the job search. So I had a new job lined up, and I started the new job in January. And then I demoed at mini demo in February, which was sort of an inflection point. And I ended up quitting this wonderful new job in March, and I've been focused on this ever since. So the tech stack for the MVP that I mentioned was React and Airtable. And I got to say, I really, really like that as a stack to get up and running quickly. And I'll show you why that's so great here. Do you want to take a picture real fast? You got it? Okay, cool. All right, so here's a quick demo of Airtable. And I'll mention that I used Ant Design for the reusable UI components too, which is really nice. Okay, so before anybody freaks out, this is live data, but this is all anonymized live data. And so this is the same information that's shown on the site. So you have a person's title, and then you have their status, their location, what experience level they are, what category they are on the site, their feelings about remote work or how they want to contribute, employment, relocation, et cetera. So it's just a familiar sort of spreadsheet-like interface. And it actually, they have a really nice mobile app too. So this ended up being a really nice, easy-to-use CMS just for this is where all the data goes, and I can manage it on my phone. And then the data shows up and gets connected to React really easily. I'll show you that. So as the dream about Airtable, and the amazing thing about Airtable is that they give you really, really nice and easy-to-use API docs. And the added bonus is that they customize them based on your project. And so this is an example with a sample project. And so they have an Airtable node package that you can just pull into your repo. And here are some legit straight up code snippets you can copy and paste from their docs into your app and pull your data straight from Airtable. As far as ease of getting up and running quickly, I don't think there's much easier than this. And so Airtable is amazing, and I really, really, really enjoyed using it. And even though I'm not using it anymore, I still really think highly of it. And I wanted to share that this is a nice, easy stack to get up and running quickly. And then I mentioned Ant Design, which is reusable UI components. And so if you poke around in the docs here, you'll see a lot of familiar stuff when you look at the site. So that's Airtable, which is pretty great. So I built an MVP and I got validation. Now what, right? I've proven that this thing is going to work and that people are willing to pay for it. So now I need to figure out what is that future more sustainable architecture and infrastructure look like. And so the things that I sort of took into consideration were I wanted to use tech that I already knew. I wanted to keep it simple, as simple and lightweight as possible. I looked into using Node for an all JavaScript tech stack, but I couldn't find an ORM that was Active Record, which I was accustomed to using and really enjoyed. I knew I wanted to use Postgres. And so once I had already established that I was going to use Rails, the question was, do I use Rails API only, or do I use Rails the standard full-blown Rails with view layer stuff? And I decided on the API only version. And then it was okay, now I need to figure out how I can administrate all of this data instead of just writing queries. And so I ended up deciding on Active Admin. And very conveniently, I found an article that almost to a T mapped out this exact same tech stack that I had decided on, which made it really, really easy again to get up and running quickly. I mean, I should say, this was not something that happened quickly, but it was a really nice, it was nice to have a guide to sort of hold my hand through setting up the infrastructure the right way so that it's more sustainable going forward. And so this is sort of what that transition looked like from MVP to the transition to the version 1 platform. And so I started with React and Ant on the front end. The forms how I got data into the database was Airtable, and the database was also Airtable. There was no backend, and so because of that, I was able to host it for free on GitLab pages. I could have also hosted it on GitHub pages too, which would have been fine as well. And so during the transition, that was actually the awkward part, where I was I'm spinning up a Rails app, I'm hosting it on Heroku, but I still want the data to come from Airtable. And so I had a Rails controller that was set up that was literally just hitting Airtable's API and returning the data to the front end. So it was a little bit janky, but it was at least a way to have the right foundation in place for me to continue to make progress and slowly chip away at getting off of Airtable. And then like just in the last couple weeks, I finally finished that conversion. And so all of the forms and everything are done with React and Ant on the site now, and Postgres is the backend for the database for the backend. And on the right-hand side, you can see a really beautiful diagram that I made to explain to my wife what I was doing as I was doing it. Hopefully the table on the left is a little bit more legible. Okay, so that was sort of how the invisible network came to be and sort of the design decisions that went into it. And some of the challenges that I've come across and learned along the way, I feel like as I've been like solving these problems and complaining to Brandon about them, he's like, oh, that would make a really good talk. Oh, that'd make a really good talk. And I'm like, oh crap, Brandon's gonna make me give a talk about this. And so here I am giving a talk about it. So some of the things that I learned, I guess the biggies are like these acronyms that I didn't really ever want to know about until I needed to know about them. So like CORS and CSRF. So in my experience, I had heard like more experienced developers complaining about them before, but I had never actually like spent time learning about them because I didn't need to. And I felt sort of like relieved that like somebody who's more experienced was like dealing with it. And of course now this like came back to bite me in the ass because, sorry, I didn't mean to swear. This came back to bite me because all of a sudden I need to learn this. And so one disclaimer before I get into any of this is that I am not an expert on any of this, but I want to share this information because hopefully there's something that came out of the mistakes I made and what I learned that will hopefully be helpful when you encounter these problems in the future. Okay, so this was the moment when I realized that I needed to learn about CORS and CSRF. And so on the front end, I got this 422 error saying it failed to load resource. And on the back end, I looked closer into the code and I saw, oh, there's a 422, this is great. And it says this thing about HTTP origin headers not matching between port 3000 and 3001. It's like, oh great, this is a great opportunity. Like it's not like I need to get this code out the door or anything. This is a good time to learn this. So the TLDR, the short version, is that CORS stands for cross-origin resource sharing. And the problem is that your front end runs on a different port or server than your back end, and that your back end has sort of built-in protections against that. And the solution is to tell your back end that that's okay, which like sounds a lot simpler than it really is. But in actuality, there are like gems and NPM packages that make solving these problems pretty straightforward. I think the trickiest part for me was figuring out that CORS was the problem that I was having and figuring out that was the thing I needed to Google for. And so here's like a diagram. I didn't actually read this whole Mozilla doc, but I would say if you know that CORS is your problem, go read about CORS and you'll be in a much better situation than I was. But the idea here being that if you have requests coming back and forth between the same server, everything's great and wonderful. And if you have requests that aren't coming back and forth between the same server, the back end, and then you have a front end that's built on something else, those are going to appear to be coming from two separate places, at least locally. And so this is just a diagram to sort of summarize that. So as I was going back, like last night, I was looking back at my commit history to figure out like exactly where I solved these problems and how I solved them. And I didn't realize until literally like as I was pulling back up the code and trying to reproduce the problem that like the solution that I thought was actually the solution wasn't the solution. And so Rails has this thing that's built into it called protect from forgery. And for whatever reason in Rails 5, the default is now exception instead of null session. And if that doesn't make any sense to anybody, that's perfectly fine. Maybe it makes sense to Tamara. I'm sure it definitely does. And so this was actually like a really simple fix that solved the problem of that like really gross 422 error that we saw before. There were other things at play there, which we're going to get into when we talk about CSRF. But this was the first solution, which is this protect from forgery thing. And my apologies that this isn't all JavaScript. I know that this is JavaScript amend, but we're here.
You have the same issue with node servers.
Yeah. To Tamara's point, you have the same issue with node servers. It's just you're going to have slightly different code to fix it. And so this was the other solution, which is there's a CORS gem, which is built into Rails and it's commented out. And so to include it, you just need to comment it. You need to uncomment it. And there's a typo in here. If there are any sticklers in the room, there just shouldn't actually be a comma right there. So, in case you wanted to, call me out. Okay, so the CSRF thing. CSRF stands for cross-site request forgery. which if you've got Core's stuff configured correctly, the problem is how do you prevent your backend from handling requests from anywhere that's like not just your front end? And the solution that seems to be very common is setting a special CSRF token that the server sends to the front end, and then the front end sends back to the server or the back end when it issues a new request. And so Rails has this stuff built in with CSRF meta tags, but those are things that are only included if you're using the view layer components of Rails. And so that was the thing that I had to solve because I wasn't using the view layer. And then these are packages, node packages that I haven't actually ever used before, but in quickly searching the internet for CSRF solutions for Node, CSRF and CSRF, both packages exist and presumably solve some of these problems. So the solution, again, not in JavaScript, but in Rails, was to set that cookie. And so you'll see that there's the CSRF cookie gets set by the controller, and it's called an XSRF token. And then after it sets it, it verifies requests whenever new requests come through. And then this is where some actual JavaScript comes through. I initially solved the problem by doing something janky with Axios where I was reading the cookie using something called JS cookie, which turns out I didn't actually need. And so a more elegant solution is this thing where you just pass in a little thing that says credentials true. And the nice thing is that if you like, we're gonna like, if we get into the demo, I'll show you this in real time, but there's either a CSRF or XSRF token cookie set that's just like living there on when you're looking at the app. And you just have to basically tell it to read that cookie and then pass it back with requests. And that's what this allow credentials and credentials true does. So it's nice that was sort of built into Axios and made it for an easy, elegant solution. But this was, again, like the third attempt at solving the problem, which is how I got to this elegant solution. So I've got a live demo sort of teed up and ready to go if there's time. And I don't want to keep anybody if they want to get outside in a beautiful day. Brandon's giving me the thumbs up. OK, we're going to do a live demo. This is going to be crazy. All right. So again, I mentioned I have the Rails API, and then I have the front end, which is all with Create React App. And so the front end lives at localhost 3000, and then the back end lives at localhost 3001. And it's just like issuing requests back and forth to get the data and add data to the database and all that. OK. So if I want to go and add myself to the site, like we sort of already talked about, I'll fill in some stuff. And this is where you're going to see how cumbersome the form is, and you're probably never going to want to actually fill it out in the future. St. Paul, how would you describe your dream job search? Passively looking, relocating, working remote, sure. How do I want to contribute? I promise there's like a good story to me going through this slowly, which I'll tell you in just a moment. Chief connector. And I'm not going to fill all that. That's too much. 4 years. Expertise, Ruby. OK. All right. So here we are. And I've checked my boxes. And I submitted my sweet form. And I got this gross 422 error that blew everything up on me, right? So let's look here on the server and let's find these problems. Can you folks read that? Hopefully you can read it. All right. So here we have our post request. It's coming through, and we have all these parameters that came through. And now we have our message saying, oh, the origin header doesn't match, rats. And now we have our 422 saying unprocessable entity, and it's telling us there's an invalid authenticity token. So with that, let's look in the code a little bit. Let's see if you can you folks see that? Is that big enough? Hopefully. All right, I conveniently have already like commented out the solutions to these problems. So this Rails thing called protect from forgery, if I change it from exception to null session, we're going to watch in real time. Hopefully this is going to work. And after many painstaking, many times painstakingly filling out that annoying form over and over again, I added a button to just fill it all in for me, which like was really nice because then I didn't have to like painstakingly go through and fill out all these forms of validate every single time. So I added this Hodor button, which is just going to fill everything out with Hodor. All right, and hey, look at that. We submitted our form and it works. And for the life of me, I can't really explain to you why that works, but I can tell you that that was the solution to the problem. But again, as we get further into this, I'll sort of, we'll look at some CSRF stuff, and I feel like the CSRF stuff feels like the important parts here, because that's how you're like really making sure that your front end is the only thing that's allowed to do stuff with your back end, or anything with the CSRF token that the server has sent comes back, like that's the stuff that's allowed, and anything else is not. So that solved cores, and I won't bother to show you that Hodor actually got added, but you can trust me that Hodor got added. So the next thing is setting those CSRF tokens, and the solution for that, and I should say, oh, where's our post? I already lost it. There's so many Hodors in here. Okay, well, so now it's like, let's do the CSRF thing, right? And I feel like in some of my many times, like going through this same process multiple times and trying to figure out exactly what the solution was and what the problem was, I found that the request would still come through, even though, oh, here it is. Ah, found it. Look at that. Okay, so we have our HTTP origin header thing. We have our error message in there, but the request went through, right? And so we didn't get an exception. We didn't get a 422, which is good, but we still have this cores problem. And this is where like the lines between cores and CSRF get blurred, because it's like by fixing like one of them, you fix both of them, or vice versa. And so this is the thing we want to do away with. And I'm glad I could find it. Too many Hodors. So we're just going to go straight to implementing the elegant solution, so don't waste too much time. But so the idea here is that we want to set a cookie, and the cookie is going to be called an XSRF token. And the server, when the server talks to the front end, it's going to tell it it's going to set the cookie, and then the cookie is going to get sent back from the front end to the server to say, hey, that's a good request, wonderful, we're in business. And so I can show you really fast. This is what the clunky solution looked like. I used something called JS cookie to read the CSRF token from the cookies on the front end, which I didn't actually need because the more elegant solution already existed. So I'll spare you those details. But here's the elegant solution. We go from just having an Axios instance to having an Axios instance where we say allow credentials and make those true. And so, fingers crossed, we're going to get a solution. Oh, one other thing. So this is the thing that's actually important. So as I was testing this, I'm like trying to oh yeah. Oh, thank you. It's too bad. Hopefully Axios would interpret that correctly. Thank you. So this is a thing that was like installing the cores gem and adding this stuff to it didn't actually change anything as I was going through and trying to recreate the problem. Changing that protect from forgery setting was the thing that actually fixed it. But this is where it is important, because you have to set that credentials true on both the front end and the back end. And so we could test and see what happens here. If I've set credentials, allow credentials true for Axios, but not for rack cores. And I don't actually know what's going to happen here, but let's see. Our trusty Hodor button. Hey, it worked. But let's see. So it worked before, which is also encouraging. But now we want to know if it worked and if it solved that origin problem. And it looks like it did. So hey, maybe we didn't need it after all. All right, and this shows how much I know. Yeah?
If your course thing is actually, that's the middleware, wouldn't it require a restart?
That is a great point. Let's try.
It says it's middleware.
Let's do it. We'll see. Is it warm in here? Okay, great. Perfect. The HVAC, right? All right, we're back in business, and this is where we have Axio sending credentials, but we don't have core set up. Still worked, which is the expected behavior, but let's see about this origin thing. I don't see the origin thing. It's a base URL. That was the error. Don't see it. Hey, maybe it didn't even need rec cores at all. Surprise. Well, anyways, we're going to uncomment, and it's still going to work, right? So that's my live demo. Really exciting, right? Woo! Okay, and with that, we'll get to talking about SEO, which is, I'm sure, the whole reason why all of you are here. Yeah.
So after we enter our profiles, why aren't we allowed to revise or update anything?
So the question from our friend in the back was, why aren't you able to update anything on your profile on the invisible network after you enter it? And the answer is because that feature has not been built yet. I'm working on SEO right now, as I'm about to show you. But after that, I'll add user accounts. And then after user accounts, I'll give you the ability to view and modify your profile. But until then, if you add yourself and you'd like to make changes to your profile, just shoot me an email. There are a lot of links on the site to email me if you want to email me. All right. So let's talk about SEO and single page apps. And this is an example of what we have right now. And you'll notice the absence of a rich preview for like a job seeker's profile, which is where you might expect to see a preview with like a photo and like a summary and like a title. And we don't have that right now. And this is not what we want. And so you can see as I share my link in Slack, I get a rich preview that says name and photo hidden reduced bias. And I got the title of the person, or the desired title of the person. They want to be an astronaut. And I've got their location, and I've got a summary sort of the role that they're looking for. This is what we want. And the problem is that that's way more complicated than it should be. And so here's the TLDR about SEO with single page apps. And I feel like, Tamara, I feel like you already touched on this a little bit too, which is that server-side rendering is like one of many solutions for this problem. And so the goal here is to have dynamic meta tags that generate rich previews for social media and wherever the heck else they're going to give you previews that's based on the content of the page. And the problem is that client-side React code or client-side JavaScript code isn't going to get rendered when the robots hit your site, and hence no actual meta tags. And the solution is not nearly as simple as you'd hope. And this is the moment where, in retrospect, I should have added a lot more animated GIFs. If I had added some animated GIFs, I would add the one from A Good Place where Eleanor says, holy forking shirt balls, which is to say, like, all of the research I've done, like, there are so many potential solutions out there that it's kind of overwhelming. But there's a thing called React Helmet, which allows you to dynamically change meta tags. That's in your JavaScript components, but it requires server-side rendering to actually work. And then the other thing is that there are some platforms and frameworks that just sort of have SEO and pre-rendering and server-side rendering built in, which is really nice. But if you're like me, and built your thing to be up and running quickly, and you didn't necessarily think about SEO and like way down the road, you might be in the same boat as I am. But some of those platforms and frameworks are Next.js, Netlify, and Gatsby. And I'll talk about those all of those a little bit more later. So just from a like what would my dream solution be perspective, hopefully minimal impact to my existing infrastructure. I would like it to be free or inexpensive, and hopefully it would be simple and follow like conventions that are common out there, and use like tech and frameworks that are widely supported. I don't know if I've ever heard people say that React is volatile. I feel like JavaScript as a whole is very volatile, but React I feel like is the one thing that's been pretty stable in my mind for the last couple of years. And so I guess maybe we can have a discussion after this. And so I wanted to use stuff that's like presumably still going to be around in like 6 months to a year, hopefully more than that. And then lastly, I chose to use Rails API only because I didn't want to use Rails' view layer stuff. And so some of the solutions, which I think you also casually mentioned in your talk, Tamara, this is very convenient, like React on Rails or React Rails, are situations where they will do the server-side rendering for you, which inherently solves this problem. But I didn't want to do that because I wanted to compartmentalize my API from my front end. And so here's a big long list of all the possible solutions at a glance. And I want to give a big shout out to Eric Ostrom, who's here tonight, because he helped with a lot of this research. And I do this thing that my wife hates, and it's called trust but verify. And it's where she'll tell me something, and I will say, yes, okay, I will totally do that. And then I will go do my own research independently to confirm the thing that she already told me. And she hates it, understandably. But I also did the same thing with Eric here. And what's convenient is that Eric and I both independently did our research, and we came to the same conclusion, which I will share at the end. You have a question, Paul?
What else do you do that your wife hates?
What else do I do that my wife hates?
Got a mic, she's gonna want to know.
I'll have to save that question for the end. We'll see if we have time. Okay, so the possible solutions. At a high level, there are solutions that involve using a node server, doing server-side rendering with a node server. There are solutions that involve doing server-side rendering with a Rails server. There are solutions called pre-rendering services, which is like not quite server-side rendering, but it's not quite not server-side rendering. It's like server-side rendering for your JavaScript app as a service, like specifically for this exact problem. But then there are other solutions too, like static site generators, like Gatsby, which I presume is actually like a static site. I haven't actually used it, but I've heard a lot of good things. And then Netlify is an example of a hosting platform that just has a pre-rendering service built into it. And so it's like, man, I wish I had known this before I started working on this. And so those were sort of like high level, like what the possible options were. And I guess I'll talk through sort of some of the open questions that I had as I was looking at them, because with a Rails server and a React front end, right now, like when I run them locally, I have 2 separate processes. But when I